Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat malam dan salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Selamat datang dan bergabung dalam webinar series Jalan Tengah yang ke-16, Minggu 23 Februari 2025. Terima kasih atas kesempatan yang telah diberikan. Saya Ulfa Zuryani, selaku moderator yang akan mendampingi selama sesi webinar berlangsung. Sebelumnya saya ingin menyapa nih para peserta yang telah hadir pada malam hari ini. Baik, apa kabar Bapak Ibu Sobat Jalan Tengah malam hari ini?
Baik,
Semoga
Kakak.
Oke, baik, Alhamdulillah. Semoga kesehatan dan kebahagiaan selalu menyertai kita semua ya. Amin ya rabbal alamin. Dan teman-teman sekalian, spesial pada malam hari ini kita kedatangan beberapa peserta nih dari luar negeri yang mana akan kami sapa dulu ya teman-teman ya. Baik, hello everyone. I'm Ulfa Zuryani as a moderator. Welcome to the foreign participant who have joined the webinar. Nice to meet you and thank you to all of you who attend our webinar tonight. Oke, baik Bapak Ibu hadirin yang berbahagia, pada malam hari ini Jalan Tengah bersama Virtual Research Center for Bioinformatics and Biotechnology dengan bangga mempersembahkan webinar nasional yang merupakan rangkaian dari webinar series kita dan saat ini telah mencapai webinar series yang ke-16 dengan mengusung tema Harnessing Sirna and Structural Bioinformatics to Combat COVID-19 and Breast Cancer, Recent Advance in Targeted Silencing. Oke, dengan mengusung tema tersebut, acara ini kami harapkan dapat memberikan pengalaman yang inspiratif bagi peserta malam hari ini. Sebelumnya kami ingin menginfokan bahwasanya setiap webinar series kita akan membagikan door prize nih kepada kalian semua. Caranya gampang banget. Follow dulu Instagram kami di jalantengah.site dan vrcbb.id. Setelah itu bikin instastory yang menarik terkait kegiatan pada malam hari ini dan tag di kedua akun tersebut. Nanti akan kami undi 3 pemenang untuk mendapatkan voucher berupa pendampingan publikasi senilai Rp500.000. Nah, jangan lewatkan kesempatan ini ya teman-teman ya. Dan ada info lagi bahwasanya webinar kali ini akan terbagi menjadi beberapa sesi. Sesi pertama yaitu material presentation oleh narasumber kita. Selanjutnya question and answer session. Lanjutkan dengan closing statement from our speaker dan the last is documentation and closing. Baik, untuk memberikan insight seputar materi pada malam hari ini, kami menghadirkan narasumber yang spesial tentunya dan sangat kompeten di bidangnya. Beliau Profesor Dr. Renat Arli Aditya Parikesit, SSI, MSI. Dan berikut merupakan CV dari beliau ya. Izinkan saya untuk membacakan CV dari Profesor Arli. Beliau merupakan seorang profesor bioinformatika pada Indonesia International Institute for Life Sciences, Jakarta atau I3L. Dengan gelar PhD in Bioinformatics, graduated from University of Leipzig, Germany. Wow, luar biasa. Dengan research interest pada bidang Bioinformatics and Informatics. Dan berikut ada alamat email dari beliau ya, arli.parikesit@i3l.ac.id. Bisa geser ke bawah, operator? Oke. Selanjutnya di situ kita bisa lihat ada official website dari beliau, Researcher ID, Orchid ID, Scopus Author ID, dan Google Scholar Author ID. Dengan award dan achievement pada Distinction for Professionalism of Judge at ISIF 2019 at FIT Accreditation Authority Singapore dan Biomedical Informatics Paper Competition. Luar biasa. Dengan pengalaman beliau sebagai peer review skills enhancement Pablo Academy mentor dan sebagai trainer at the program of ICT and English Literacy Empowerment in Elementary School around I3L. Oke, luar biasa ya. Bisa izin ke bawah. Dengan berikut publikasi beliau, salah satunya mengenai Artificial Intelligence in Colonoscopy, Improving Medical Diagnosis of Colorectal Cancer, dan masih banyak lagi publikasi oleh beliau, luar biasa. Oke, bisa ke bawah mengenai publikasinya. Oke, mungkin masih nge-lag ya teman-teman ya. Baik, tanpa berlama-lama, mari kita sapa nih narasumber kita yang luar biasa pada malam hari ini, yang terhormat Profesor Dr. Renat Arli Aditya Parikesit, SSI, MSI. Selamat malam, Profesor Arli.
Selamat malam, Mbak Ulfa. Selamat malam, kawan-kawan sekalian.
Baik, gimana nih kabarnya Profesor Arli malam hari ini?
Oh, baik, baik. Tadi sedikit hujan cuaca, tapi sekarang kelihatannya cerah.
Iya, hujan tidak menyurutkan semangat kita ya, Prof
tidak,
ya?
Tidak.
Oke,
Malah
luar
bikin
biasa.
semangat. Oke.
Alhamdulillah. Kami ucapkan terima kasih kepada Profesor Arli yang sudah berkenan menjadi narasumber kita pada malam hari ini. Baik teman-teman sudah hadir bersama kita ya, narasumber kita malam hari ini, dan siapkan catatan dan pertanyaan yang akan kalian ajukan nantinya. Karena setelah sesi pemaparan materi selama 1 jam oleh Prof. Arli, akan kita lanjutkan dengan sesi tanya jawab. Baik, tanpa berlama-lama, untuk Profesor Arli, waktu dan tempat kami persilakan.
Oke, saya siapkan slide-nya dulu. Sebentar. Entire screen. Entire screen. Ini kelihatan slide-nya?
Oke, terlihat, Prof.
Ini gerak ke slide berikutnya kelihatan?
Terlihat.
Oke. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Selamat malam kawan-kawan sekalian. Jadi saya permisi dulu karena ada international audience di sini. Saya akan menggunakan bahasa Inggris untuk materinya. Tapi nantinya apabila ada pertanyaan kita terbuka untuk bahasa Indonesia atau bahasa Inggris. Oke, good afternoon, good night everybody. So I'm going to present my slide about the role of non-coding RNA in COVID-19 research, and the case of spike glycoprotein, and also I'm going to present about the application of non-coding RNA in, of course, breast cancer. So I'm going to elaborate a bit that the motivation of this presentation for tonight will be about explaining my 2 papers here. So these are 2 papers about silencing RNA design, and actually some members of Jalan Tengah researchers are here as well. So the first paper is about HIR2 splice variant of mRNA for breast cancer intervention, and the other one is for SARS-CoV-2 spike glycoprotein gene. So we designed a silencing RNA for cancer, for tumor biology, and also for infectious disease. So basically, it is to showcase that our pipeline is applicable to all facets of disease, whether it is infectious disease or tumor. But the first question that we have to answer is why we should do non-coding RNA annotation and why non-coding RNA is important at all. So I think everybody has learned this, especially if you are students of life sciences, whether you are bachelor students or graduate students. So we learned that in our college years that the central dogma theory stipulated that the protein is the most important regulator. So nothing else besides protein. It's only protein there. And we also thought that 5% of human genome, only 5% of human genome is important. So 95% of human genome is just junk. So after years of research, this scheme cannot cope with what will be the latest biomedical challenges. And some scientists are beginning to think, is it true that this 95% of human genome is just junk? So in the 80s and 90s, there was an Australian scientist. His name is John Matix, and I extensively cited his papers. So he wrote a lot of papers about non-coding RNAs. So he created this scheme, this scheme down here, and actually I redraw this scheme from some of his papers. I think what you can see in the bolded arrows here, this is basically the flow of central dogma. So we have gene, it is transcribed into into primary transcript, and it is spliced into assembled exon, and then you have messenger RNA is translated into protein, and this is basically the central dogma that we know. But John Matix argues that what's happening in our gene is not only that, and it is unlocking the mystery of the rest 95% of our genome. So this is what's happening in the 5% of our genome, the bolded arrow. But the rest, actually, something else happens that's not only not only it is transcribed into a messenger RNA, so some aspect of this flow of genetic information went into introns as well, and it is processed into non-coding RNAs. And from the assembled exon, it is processed into non-coding RNA as well. So in here, my faith was shaken, because earlier I believed that okay, when I was a graduate student, I previously believed that's okay, we only have central dogma and then you got protein and nothing else, and something else happens here. Yeah. Something else happened here. We have non-coding RNA, various types of non-coding RNA, snow RNA, microRNA, silencing RNA, and many more. So my faith was shaken. So I have to readjust my belief and my paradigm about what's happened with the flow of genetic information. So it's very clear that this information stream from METIC demonstrate that various types of RNA play a role in the gene regulations. Snow RNA long, it's actually microRNA, and there are lots of it. And the followers of METIC also believe that it is still hypothetical, but the less universal common ancestor, or LUCA, actually this is the ancestor of all living being, is a virus-like entities or organism with an RNA core. Yeah. So this is so based upon all of these epistems, that I believe that non-coding RNA plays roles in gene regulation, even though it's not translated into protein. They play a role. And so the thing is, so in order to showcase that non-coding RNA indeed play roles in the gene regulation, we have to scientists have to prove that actually RNA as an entity, as a biomolecule, should be stable enough. Yeah. So they indeed count the free binding energies of the RNA based upon the hydrogen bond that exists in it. It's actually the same thing when you do molecular dockings, and so they count that yeah, these types of bonding like hairpin and others, it is elicited the total free binding energies that is spontaneous. So basically this bulge is could be formed in a stable manner. Yeah. So yeah, so based upon this calculation, so they believe that although the stability this kind of species is not exist in the long term, it's just fraction of nanosecond, it is stable enough to exist also in just a fraction of seconds. Okay. And so basically this some people believe that after the invention of non-coding RNA theory, and was popularized by John Matix, and so they believe that okay, because non-coding RNA regulates everything, so why should we learn about protein anymore? Actually, it's not like that, because you see how non-coding RNA, so one example, this microRNA was formed. The formation of microRNA is mainly assisted by proteins. Okay? So you can see that, for instance, this is not matured, pre microRNA. It's not matured yet, but this protein ROSA and DGCR is assisted to the maturity of the pre microRNA, and then another protein GTP is making it more mature, and it is discarded, unwinding, and then yeah, so it is go, and some proteins, there are cascades of protein that's involved basically in the maturation of microRNAs. So but we are still consider protein as an important entities as well. So beside that, but the problem is it is very different with one computational problem, that it is very different with protein. RNA is unstable because they have these pre-hydroxyl functional groups, yeah, pre-hydroxyl functional groups. So it could forms even a very simple structure could very simple structure could have millions of conformations. Yeah. So that's why scientists try to think that how to count, how to predict the structure in an efficient and fast manner. So they use this dynamic programming algorithm to do that. Yeah. So I mean, you can read the details in here. So basically, this is based upon a graph theory. There are graphs and edges and nodes. There are nodes, so they consider this uh, RNA bases as nodes, and it is attached by some graph in here. So by using this dynamic programming algorithm, so the prediction of the structure and the reactivity of the RNA, it could be done in a more efficient way. So this is some of the two-dimensional structure that could be predicted by dynamic programming. So basically there are we have 5 basic structures that were predicted. So we can see this is stacking pair, hairpin loop, multi-loop, birch, and interior loop. So all these 5 structures are the basic two-dimensional structures of not only non-coding RNA, but RNA in general. RNA in general, so all of these 5 structures. So the thing is, so that's previous slides elicited that thermodynamics. I think the same like protein modeling. So in RNA modeling, we are mainly using thermodynamic and statistical mechanics to do the prediction, and it's coincide with the thermodynamics stability. Same with the proteins. I mean but the main problem, I think it's going to be clear later on that it is unlike protein. Protein has domains, right? So proteins got a module that's mainly acted as a single evolutionary unit. We call it protein domain. Like one protein could be consisted of one or even more domains, but in RNA you don't have that kind of unit. So, I mean, in protein you have, for instance, interpro database, superfamily database, pfam database, and many others that I think most of them are interpro and superfamily database that annotate protein domains. But in RNA you don't have it. Like you can check RNA central database, for instance. It's basically in there. It's very complicated because like even for one sequence, for just one sequence, it could has many structures, many structures, because RNA doesn't have any domain unit in it there. That's the problem. So it's the same like, but basically the basic calculation is the same like proteins. You have more negative binding energy, is more stable, yeah, and yeah. So we have to find the structure with lowest total free energy, and it's computationally not easy for RNA. So it's not easy for RNA. So that's why up to now, I mean, if you go to check the AlphaFold database, I mean, they're using AI to predict protein. There are not that many RNA structures in AlphaFold. Yeah, there are some, but not that many. It is still dominated with proteins because it is always easier to predict protein structure because they have this stable evolutionary unit of a protein domain. So these are just some ways how to represent two-dimensional RNA structures. So this color just represent a different bulge here. So this is representing a different bulge in here. So it's just matter of coloring. And basically one methods that you can use to predict RNA structure easily. I mean, it's same thing like with predicting protein by using homology modeling. So you have a template structure and target structure, and then the software will do sequence alignment, and then you have the predicted structure. But once again, in RNA is not really is not really as accurate as in proteins, because in RCSB database, so you know that RCSB is the wet lab data for all biomolecules experiments, right? Biomolecules crystallography experiments, right? So it is still mostly dominated by protein data. I think it's 70% or even more. Only just a handful of RNA's data in RCSB database, but we need a template structures to do homology modeling. So the accuracy of RNA prediction by using homology modeling is not, of course, as accurate as the one in protein model. It will not, because the existing structure is just too few. So there is software that you can do that. That was for three-dimensional prediction, and this is for two-dimensional prediction. So for two-dimensional prediction, this package, Vienna RNA package, was developed by Ivo Hoefeker and my supervisor, Peter Stadler from Leipzig. And it has a web interface. It's cheap, so basically everybody can use it. Although you can use this offline platform in Linux, you have the online web interface, so everybody can use it. You don't have to be a computer scientist to use this software. So this is the Vienna RNA package interface. You can go to their websites in here from the University of Vienna, and then you can see there are some modules in the software that you can use to do some prediction. So many is for predicting two-dimensional structure, yeah, and to do structural alignment and some other stuff, and to design, and also to design non-coding RNA sequences. You can do it in here, and some other features as well. It's kind of a complete package that for all kinds of predictions, RNA predictions in here. And so that was for the two-dimensional. So now we are going to discuss about three-dimensional prediction for three-dimensional structure prediction for RNA. So I have told you that homology modeling, you can use homology modeling for predicting RNA structure, but it's not really that accurate, because the templates for RNA structure is not really that much, yeah. But you can also use discrete molecular dynamics. So you know, molecular dynamics is it's molecular dynamics. You know that basically you run a molecular dynamics to model the 3D structure. It's much more accurate. So this is basically a result of prediction of I-fold RNA or mBox riboswitch. Yeah, but the problem is with this I-fold RNA, it's more accurate than homology modeling, but if you use the online version, they have, of course, size limitation. Like if the protein is, if the RNA sequence is too long, or the predicted structure is too big, of course, because this is a free software and online, it's going to basically crash. You know, they will not provide you any result, and they will just reject your query, because this is too much for us to handle. And alternative, there is one alternative that you can download the offline software, but once again, you need a very powerful computer to run this. Yeah. So you can do that, yeah, to download the offline software and run it offline. Yeah, this is basically one other result of, you can see that this is the structure input, yeah, and then this is the sequence input. So this is a comparison between crystal structure blue and red, between the predicted structure, the green and yellow, and the one that's based upon the experimental validation. It is a line like here, yeah, but basically the alignment is it's kind of kind of good. So this is an so this is a RNA docking example with this structure input, and this is the docking result. But so this is for the three-dimensional structure. But for the cluster of complex structure, so basically there are, for instance, a database of RNA. For RNA two-dimensional structure, is we know there is one database such as RNA Central, so they make clustering of this complex structure by using machine learning, so to make a clustering to classify the structure. But once again, the structures are too many because there are so many variations of two-dimensional structure. It's unlike proteins where you have a domain unit. They don't have domains, so the database is keep expanding if you go to the RNA Central database. So what will be the challenge of this non-coding RNA annotation? I have told you earlier some of the challenges of this annotation, because they don't, this kind of the genes don't have the significant statistical signal. The problem with the existing gene predictions, they are mainly trained to predict protein coding genes, okay, or ORF, ORF. I mean, there are a lot of initiatives to train non-coding RNA genes these days, but because earlier scientists do that, especially when they did this Human Genome Project, they use gene predictors to predict protein coding genes, so you don't have so much significant information about non-coding RNA genes. And it's large, and the size is differs from 20 nucleotides to 22,000 and so on, and it's so many problem, especially it's computationally extensive. So that's why for instance, AlphaFold project, although they won a Nobel Prize for the scientists who created AlphaFold, they won a Nobel Prize, but they won a Nobel Prize mainly for protein prediction, not for RNA prediction. It's because it's too complex, it's too complicated. So, and this is the one examples. Maybe it's this is from HIV virus, RNA stem loop structure. This is from HIV virus, and you know that HIV virus is a small virus. It is the genomic structure is just less than 10,000 base pair, and core is RNA, and it's like this. This is second two-dimensional structure. It's already complex like this. Very complex and complicated like this, and this is one chemical structure. This one structure has a huge bulge in this part and so on. And it's to predict the three-dimensional structure is going to be much more complicated, and there is no templates at all, for instance, to predict the three-dimensional structure. So that's why it's this kind of research is very time-consuming and laborious. Yeah. So basically, you need for computational methods, because experimental identification for not only microRNAs but non-coding RNA in general is slow, because RNA is notorious to be unstable, because they have, of course, I've told you, they have these free hydroxyl groups that making RNA tend to be unstable. And you know that this free hydroxyl group, it's making RNAs to have this autocatalytic property. So basically, RNAs could cleave itself. It's not like protein. Protein could only cleave other protein, but RNA could cleave itself. So it's like RNA can do self-destruct. It's like Mission Impossible, it's like after several seconds, the computer will self-destruct, things like that. So RNA is like that. It's not like protein, where protein could only degrade other proteins, such as protease enzyme, but RNA is like that, not like that. It's not only like that. RNA is not only be able to degrade other RNA, but it could degrade itself. So you can see how unstable RNA is. Okay, it's very unstable. It's very, very unstable. Now, we are going to move to one aspect of this talk about SARS-CoV-2, yeah, about SARS-CoV-2 non-coding RNA annotation. So, so this is actually was, I think we already undergone this kind of situation about COVID-19 pandemics. I mean, in the past there were other pandemics, mainly because of influenza virus, from Spanish flu to Hong Kong flu and others, and all 50 million deaths in 1918 and so on. And even in COVID-19 pandemics, we have, I think it's more than 7 million deaths. Yeah, but it's actually it showcased that our existing vaccine and drugs are working, because I mean, during that time when we have this Spanish influenza pandemics in 1918, 15 million people died, and we have no drugs, no vaccine, and nothing at all at that time. But 100 years later, we have vaccine, we have drugs, so we just have, well, this is from 2020, but in 2025, and you can check in the WHO dashboard, it's just 7 million people died. So it's and we have much more population than 100 years ago. So this is a great achievement. Although it's nothing great about people die, but yeah, but it's still much better. You are in a much better condition. But once again, at that time, when the WHO declared the COVID-19 pandemics in 2020, we don't have any significant information about this pandemic. So that's why we did so many research, yeah, and even some aspect of our research have undergone extensive wet laboratory research, and we did some animal testing as well. Yeah, but it's still it's already our result is already shared in the conference for the animal testing for our lead compounds. Yeah, but you know, these are some of the papers from our time in the pandemic. So I mean, for 2 or 3 years we published this paper. So it's all about COVID-19, and of course we still conducting a conventional proteomic based research, doing screening for lead compounds and to do docking with protein targets and things like. So we still do that, yeah. But we have some pioneering research in designing silencing RNA in this paper up there, and also this paper. We are going to discuss about this paper that we publish in the Indonesian Journal of Chemistry. And we also create a books here about COVID-19 as well. And so these are some of the background. I think everybody knows we already 7 million people die and so on. So here's the thing about SARS-CoV-2. This is RNA virus, and we have discussed about RNA all the beginning. It has a faster mutation rate than DNA virus or bacteria, and I have told you for beginning that RNA is unstable. So I think it's no wonder that it is mutating faster than DNA virus. No wonder, because of this free hydroxyl groups. So it could not only degrade other RNA, but also could degrade itself. So that's why the mutation rate is much faster because of this matter. So it is a zoonotic infection, so it transmitted between animals and people, and it is RNA virus. So that's why this is something that is not good. Yeah. Now this is the infection cycle. Yeah. So this is the infection cycle. So you have ACE2 receptor and release of the viral genome, and then all right, so it's entering the host cell, and these are some of the related protein, and this is the SARS-CoV-2 genome as well. So we are going to focus on spike protein right over here. Yeah, but our main target will be S gene, because this is mainly catered by its protein in the viral surface, and it's facilitating attachment to the ACE2 receptor. So it's a logical target for our silencing RNA design. So our idea is to design a silencing RNA to block the messenger RNA expression of the genes, so the messenger RNA will not be translated into protein. Okay, so these are some of our methods. So these are the S-gene sequences from the NCBI website, and we did multiple sequence alignment by Mursal algorithm, and so we use basically mainly this software for Vienna RNA package to basically mainly detect the thermodynamics and kinetic spear. And we use, of course, iFold RNA to predict the 3D structure and do the docking by using specialized software as well. So we predict the RNA, the silencing RNA by using RNA-X output. Here we have the target gene, and then we also predict the conserved S gene and the silencing RNA. So it is the gene from various strain of the SARS-CoV-2 is not conserved. So these are S gene from messenger RNA for RNA fold, and this is silencing RNA. Yeah, and we did the 3-dimensional visualization of S gene SARS-CoV-2. This is from messenger RNA, and this is silencing RNA. And then we did the docking, but when we use the HNA docs, the visualization was bad. It's breaking all over the place. But when we use the UCSF Chimera, the visualization is good. So the docking was quite successful. So yeah, so we can design the silencing RNA accordingly, basically by using our pipeline. Yeah. But now I think I'm going to be fast. I hope I'm not going to waste many more of your time. So I'm going to discuss about breast cancer gene. So we apply the similar same methods to annotating breast cancer gene. So I think we know about this. Breast cancer is one of the most dangerous disease for women, and it's available to radiotherapy and others. And there are molecular approach as well for genetic mutation research targeting BRCA1 genes. And although mainly the prevalence of the breast cancer is in the developed countries, in Europe, in Japan, or in Australia, and in North America, but it's mainly because the developed countries has a very successful breast cancer screening. And in developing countries such as ours or in Africa, the screening was not really that good. So it doesn't mean that you have more breast cancer problem in developed countries. No, it's just a matter of screening. We don't have that much screening for breast cancer. So I think we know what's happened with cancer. So for healthy cell proliferation, so it's have this self-renewal, and there was a apoptosis cycle, and then it is self-renewal. But for cancer, the apoptosis cycle basically it's not working. So it's expanding and dividing indefinitely. So until you have this uncontrolled cellular growth. And this is basically the biology of breast cancer. So you have, for instance, a tumor in here, and it is expanding the tumor to the lymph vessel. So after it's entering the lymph vessel here, it's usually going to spread to our bones and also to the lung. So it's very common. So in the metastasis stage, so usually the cancer will spread to the bones and also to the lung, yeah, because it could entering this lymph vessel. Yeah. So that's not good. So this is this is just an explanation of the breast cancer stage. So in the 0 stage, 1, 2, 3, and the 4 is, of course, is the metastasis stage. So I'm going to go to the molecular stage here. So our target gene will be HIR2 gene. So we know it as this. The tyrosine kinase is play a role in regulating normal breast cancer cells. So this is basically the protein is a receptor in here, and it is activating other protein as well. Yeah? So if cancer occurred, so you see that this HER2 receptor will be upregulated, overregulated, and then it's going to activate this cascade of proteins. So it's going to cause, well, cancer basically. So in order to stop this cascades of proteins to work, so we design inhibitors. Scientists designing inhibitors in this part, and they are inhibiting this protein as well. There is TOR protein, so common cancer target. So, but our strategy is also the same like before, like with COVID. It's like before we have this, before the protein was translated, so we want to deter the messenger RNA. So we deter the HER2 gene messenger RNA, so it's not translated into a protein. So that is basically the thing. So yeah, so this is the clinical implication. So this is basically becoming a very common target for molecular diagnostics, this HR2. So this is, you can see that in breast cancer, the HER2 receptor was overly expressed in the cell. In normal cell, just some. So the job of our silencing RNA is just to silence this HER2 genes. Yeah. So in order is not to overexpress the HER2 receptors. So this is a simple line. So I mean the strategies that we use to develop our non-coding RNA is the same. It's just we are using this. We download the data from NCBI, and of course we use this PNA-RNA package, and also, but we use other software here, SIM-RNA and Mode-RNA tools, and then we did this multiple sequence alignment with the messenger RNAs, and then we found also the sequence alignment of this messenger RNAs as well, and then we design also the silencing RNA as well by using RNA-X, and we found we can predict the RNA structure as well, also the messenger RNA of the structure as well. And then, but the thing is, we also have the, I don't put it in here, we also have the 3D structure. I mean, you can check it in our paper for our 3D structure as 3D structure. This is basically, we check by mole probability about our 3D structure that it exists, but it's not really ideal. I mean, you can see some of the parameters here. We have a goals and goals. This is the ideal parameter. So I mean, if it could reach this goal, basically the structure will be deemed as stable, but it's not really as stable as that. So that's why we try to run the docking experiment. It's not really working as well because the 3D structure is not really that stable, because the problem is different with COVID, with SARS-CoV-2 is virus. I mean, virus is having a small genome, so if you predict a silencing RNA, the silencing RNA and also the messenger RNA, the structure tends to be small. But this one for human, this is human genes, and we are detecting silencing RNA for human genes, so the structure is going to be very big, and so it's not really easy to run docking in here. But we are going to rerun the docking again, so we are going to rerun this experiment. So we can design the 2 and 3D models, but for the dynamics simulations and docking simulation, we are yet to do it, but we are going to continue our research. Okay, so basically that was our research from mainly RNA modelings, but for microRNA diagnostics in 2008, for diagnostics, it's kind of successful. For many microRNA was successful to be deployed as a tumor diagnostic markers. It's very good. It's successful. I think up to now we have many success in microRNA diagnostics. But for drugs, it's not really that encouraging, because you can see that for cancer drugs, hepatitis, and other many degenerative diseases, it's in the stage in the drug development is many are discontinued or in the clinical trials. And as far as I know, there are not many RNA-based drugs in the market. I think I know one one RNA-based drugs for brain cancer, but I mean not many, because what I told you that RNA is unstable and it's not easy to isolate them in the lab. So thanks goes to the research department of I3L, NVIDIA Corporation, MABI, Apticom, and some other agency that's helping us to achieve our goals in publishing these papers. And these are some of the references. If you have further correspondence, you can contact my email in here and my Twitter account here. I'm active, and it's my Telegram, and or you can contact me to Line as well. Thank you very much for attending my talk. So I would like to take questions. Go ahead, so thank you very much.
Oke, thank you very much, Profesor Arli. Terima kasih kami sampaikan kepada Profesor Arli atas pemaparan materinya yang sangat luar biasa ya pada malam hari ini. Baik hadirin yang berbahagia, saat ini kita masuk pada sesi tanya-jawab yang akan berlangsung selama 30 menit ke depan. Kami ingatkan untuk para audiens malam hari ini, pertanyaan bisa di-drop di chat room atau bisa langsung raise hand nih ya untuk langsung berdiskusi dengan Profesor Arli. Ya, okay, now it's a question and answer question for 30 minutes. If you guys have any question, you can click raise hand or drop your question into room chat. Oke, dan seperti biasa teman-teman silakan dipantau ya di room chat karena nanti akan ada link absensi. Silakan diisi, jadi jangan lupa untuk isi link absensi. Dan baik, langsung saja persilakan Sobat Jalan Tengah untuk mengajukan pertanyaannya. Jangan lupa sampaikan nama beserta instansinya. Baik, silakan Sobat Jalan Tengah yang ingin bertanya. Halo, kami tunggu ya. Silakan bisa raise hand atau drop pertanyaan kalian di room chat. Halo teman-teman. Oke, Prof, ini ada pertanyaan dari teman kita ya di room chat. Halo Prof, kira-kira spesifikasi komputer yang mencukupi untuk melakukan analisis bioinformatik seperti yang Prof lakukan seperti apa ya? Mohon maaf tidak bisa on cam dan on mic. Thank you, Prof.
Ya, oke, pertanyaan analisis bioinformatik. Nah, kalau untuk melakukan analisis bioinformatik secara online ya laptop yang biasa kita pakai juga nggak ada masalah. Tapi kan seperti saya beritahu dari awal, kalau kita melakukan analisis online itu kan ada keterbatasan ya. Dalam arti yang saya tahu misalnya beberapa program molecular docking untuk RNA ya, HNA-doc misalnya ya. Apabila kita mau melakukan kita submit data gen dari virus kan kecil, itu nggak ada masalah, biasanya mereka mau. Tapi begitu udah gen manusia gitu ya, kayak HER2 tadi itu, mereka biasanya nggak mau, ini terlalu besar ini. Terlalu besar untuk strukturnya, walaupun kalau sequence-nya kan kecil, sequence cuman teks aja kan, tapi kan kalau sudah menjadi struktur itu udah is a different game, udah berbeda, lebih kompleks kan kalau struktur messenger RNA pada SARS-CoV itu dengan struktur messenger RNA pada HER2 pada manusia itu berbeda gitu. Nah, kalau ingin melakukannya secara offline, nah itu kita perlu komputer yang cukup kuat, kita perlu superkomputer, kita perlu server ya, yang memiliki GPU NVIDIA gitu. Kemudian kami pernah dulu, tapi ini tidak udah lama sekali kami presentasikan, kami menggunakan NVIDIA GPU ya, NVIDIA GPU yang dengan server, terus pada saat itu RAM komputernya juga cukup besar pada saat itu. Sekarang sih udah kecil, 16 GB, sekarang sih udah mainannya udah 40 GB, bahkan laptop saya aja 24 GB ini kan yang saya pakai sekarang ini. Kita pakai NVIDIA GPU Titan XP ya, karena itu untuk molecular simulation, dan kita akan dapat tim kita dapat menang grant dari Nvidia. Jadi Nvidia ngirimkan kita Titan XP ya, GPU Titan XP yang saat itu terbaru itu. Sekarang sih udah kuno Titan XP, udah nggak tahu itu Nvidia tuh udah pakai GPU model apa. Mereka udah, apalagi yang udah sekarang udah eranya AI ya, udah pakai riset AI itu udah lebih canggih lagi, udah jauh-jauh nggak ada apa-apanya, dan GPU kami juga udah depreciated, udah nggak bisa disupport lagi gitu. Tapi intinya gitu, perlu investasi yang cukup besar, dan mungkin karena kan kebetulan kami dapat research grant ya dari Nvidia itu, jadi ya investasi dari lembaga itu minim, tapi kalau sendiri kelihatannya berat, itu mesti dapat investasi yang cukup besar. Tapi itu kalau kita mau melakukan analisis secara offline ya, tapi kalau untuk secara online ya itu laptop yang jadul pun bisa gitu. Yang penting bisa melakukan protein visualization, karena docking sama dynamicnya kan bisa online semua gitu. Saya kira begitu.
Oke, seperti itu ya, Prof ya. Baik, itu tadi Mbak Listia Utami, dari pertanyaan dari Mbak Listia Utami Karmawan. Oke, selanjutnya ini ada yang raise hand, Prof, dari Saudara Wahyudin, silakan. Bisa langsung open mic, sampaikan dari instansi mana ya.
Selamat malam, Prof. Salam kenal.
Ya,
pertanyaan saya begini, Prof. Jadi dengan teknologi AI atau bioinformatika ini kan luar biasa ya, data terkumpul dengan banyak sehingga kita bisa melakukan apa saja gitu ya, mengetahui yang sebelumnya tidak ketahui. Nah, pertanyaan saya, apakah dengan teknologi yang sekarang ini, yang bioinformatika sudah berkembang cukup pesat ini, bisa melakukan semacam prediction model, Prof? Baik prediction model yang ditujukan untuk mengetahui the next pandemi gitu ya, penyakit apa yang mungkin muncul di masa depan, dan sekaligus juga produk atau obat yang belum pernah ada, apakah bisa juga diprediksi dengan teknologi sekarang itu bisa diprediksi untuk dibuat gitu, Prof. Terima kasih, Prof.
Oke, terima kasih dari Pak atau Mas Wahyudin ini ya. Pertanyaannya, apakah dengan teknologi yang sekarang AI bisa mengetahui next pandemic dan lain obat yang ada? Nah, sekarang kalau saya bilang bisa, ya bisa mengetahui next pandemic dan memprediksi obat yang belum ada. Tapi efektif atau enggak gitu? Itu dua hal yang berbeda gitu, antara able or not ya dengan effectivity gitu. Kalau able udah pasti bisa gitu. Apalagi dengan ada generatif AI sekarang kan, chat GPT, seperti Mistral, DeepSeek nih yang dari China itu yang terbaru DeepSeek, ya kan. Terus apalagi Perplexity macam-macam. Mereka bisa memprediksi segala hal. Tapi apakah prediksinya itu benar atau tidak tuh ya urusan lain gitu. Gitu kan. Nah, kalau kita bicara obat, kebetulan kan di tempat kami di Aitrial baru berapa hari yang lalu, itu baru hari Rebo atau hari Kamis yang lalu, kami ngundang narasumber ya dari Departemen Kimia UPM ya. Itu bicara tentang AI in drug design, ya intinya nggak semudah itu. Karena AI itu bisa memprediksi apa saja. Tapi apakah yang diprediksi itu di lab itu berfungsi, nah itu urusan lain. Karena saya tahu persis ada beberapa obat yang berhasil diprediksi lewat AI itu ya. Itu bahkan ada beberapa yang sudah lolos uji klinis gitu. Ada beberapa yang sudah lolos uji klinis, bahkan di Amerika dijual. Itu obat-obat yang didesain oleh AI. Tapi itu kan yang saya baca itu kelihatannya nggak sampai 10 itu. Setelah mereka menguji coba jutaan compounds. Dan berdasarkan apa yang saya pelajari dari kawan saya di Malaysia, dari kolega kami di Malaysia, itu AI itu tidak berhasil menghemat pengeluaran selama di lab gitu. Nggak signifikan penghematannya itu. Memang dia bisa memprediksi obat yang lebih akurat, tapi penghematan bisa memprediksi obat yang akhirnya bisa diaplikasikan dan dijual. Tapi itu tidak bisa signifikan melakukan penghematan gitu. Jadi kalau kita bicara apakah dia bisa memprediksi obat bahkan pandemi berikutnya gitu, saya bilang ya bisa aja, sangat bisa. Tapi apakah efektif atau tidak? Nah itu sebenarnya akhirnya efektif atau tidak itu kan yang menjadi judge itu bukan AI loh. Jangan salah. AI itu bukan judge menentukan obat itu efektif atau tidak, tapi yang menentukan efektif atau tidak itu uji klinis. Dan untuk mencapai uji klinis itu perlu kita uji coba ke sel dulu, ke hewan dulu gitu. Dan ini banyak yang gagal, walaupun udah dibantu dengan AI, tetap aja akhirnya begitu diuji klinis kan, itu apapun bisa terjadi kan. Gitu. Nah itu dia. Kalau sama juga mengetahui next pandemic, bisa memprediksi berdasarkan data epidemiologi dan lain-lain, tapi apa terjadi atau tidak, gitu, itu kan masalah lain gitu kan, karena kan tidak semudah itu gitu saya pikir. Nah itu dia, dan juga apalagi kan AI ini punya kecenderungan untuk apa yang disebut sebagai overfitting. Overfitting itu kan kalau ini juga yang juga kami amati, kalau di bioinformatika itu data yang cenderung dilatih ke AI itu data yang baik-baik aja, data yang buruk itu kan nggak pernah dilatih gitu, supaya ini publikasi kita kelihatan keren, jadi datanya yang baik-baik aja gitu. Tapi data yang buruk nggak pernah gitu kan. Tapi ini masalah kalau yang dilatih hanya data-data yang baik aja kan, apa prediksinya nanti bisa efektif gitu. Nah itu juga masalah. Dan ini yang membedakan katakanlah di bioinformatics dengan saya berani bilang di computer science ya. Kalau di computer science itu mereka data-data yang buruk juga mereka latih. Contoh seperti Tesla ya. Tesla kan dia ngembangin autonomous car itu kan, mobil otonomus ya. Itu data-data yang buruk juga mereka latih. Jadi ada data kecelakaan apa, bahkan sampai ada kecelakaan yang fatal, terus mereka latih juga di sistem AI mereka, sehingga mobil driverless mereka bisa berfungsi dengan baik gitu. Nah sebenarnya kalau di bioinformatics nggak gitu, datanya baik-baik semua, overfitting jadinya akhirnya gitu. Nah itu yang mungkin kedepannya harus diperbaiki ya, data-data yang buruk pun juga harus dimasukin ke modelnya juga, saya kira begitu. Ya terima kasih. Mudah-mudahan. Silahkan selanjutnya.
Oke, bagaimana Saudara Wahyudin?
Ya, makasih Prof, jawabannya cukup melegakan ya, karena sekarang itu dengan kemudahan tools itu banyak orang yang mulai menjual itu, Prof. Jadi wah ini produk baru, obat yang tidak pernah ada di desain dengan AI dan sebagainya ya. Saya setuju sekali, itu efektivitas itu lain hal gitu. Jadi prediction model satu hal, kemudian efektivitas itu adalah hal yang lain gitu ya. Makasih Prof.
Iya, sama-sama Pak.
Oke, luar biasa. Ini ada lagi ya Prof yang raise hand dari Saudara Rendika Rizky, silakan.
Baik, selamat malam Prof. Assalamualaikum. Perkenalkan, nama saya Rendika dari Universitas Syakuala. Jadi pada saat ini saya sedang menjalankan research tentang prediksi kanker lung cancer adenokarsinoma. Untuk sekarang kan saya sudah mengumpulkan biomarkernya itu, karena saya ingin memprediksi kansernya itu berdasarkan data biomarker, dan biomarker yang saya dapatkan termasuk ada HER2 tadi. Namun HER2 ini di sini saya dapat dari beberapa paper itu dia persentasenya sangat kecil, di bawah 10%. Sedangkan seperti keras, Kirsten sarkoma dan ALK dan juga EGFR itu dia memiliki persentase yang cukup tinggi dibandingkan HER2. Apakah saya harus menggunakan data yang signifikan persentasenya, atau saya harus menggunakan semua data yang ada dari paper yang sudah ada? Karena saya takut dari overfitting tadi, maksudnya kalau misalkan saya terlalu bagus menggunakan datanya, ini kan yang persentase besar-besar, nanti overfitting juga gitu. Jadi apa saran dari Prof kira-kira? Terima kasih Prof.
Ya, ini pertanyaan menarik. Sebenarnya saya nggak bisa memberi jawaban yang konklusif, karena kan untuk tahu lebih detail saya mesti baca desain eksperimennya gimana dan lain-lain. Tapi kan itu kan nggak mungkin. Tapi intinya begini, kalau kita mau menghindari overfitting ya kita kan mesti mentrain dengan data yang jelek. Tapi kalau data yang jelek itu nggak ada, ya apa yang bisa kita perbuat gitu. Dan itu dan itu terjadi gitu. Apa yang bisa kita perbuat kalau data yang jelek itu nggak ada. Nah ini kita lihat kenapa kok saya belum ngecek ya kan, tapi kan kami juga pernah melakukan research epigenetics. Kita pernah ngecek juga upregulated sama downregulated genes dari di lung cancer ya. Saat itu di lung cancer dan dari populasi yang merokok, tapi kita mining data dari TCGA database saja gitu kan. Sebenarnya nggak itu. Kalau kasusnya seperti ini, kenapa kok data HER2 ini belum banyak? Ini ya salah satunya memang sangat dimungkinkan emang data yang bagus cuma segitu. Data yang bagus emang cuma segitu gitu. Data yang sementara kalau di crash dan lain-lain itu data yang bagus itu lebih banyak, dan ya tentu saja kalau data yang bagus emang tidak banyak kan berarti ada kesulitan dalam melakukan eksperimen kan, ada kesulitan tertentu kan. Ya banyak lah kan kalau di lab kenapa itu yang terjadi. Nah kalau saran saya sih apabila memang datanya sedikit ya kita mau mencari novelty. Karena saya yakin, saya tidak tahu ya, tapi saya yakin kalau yang mayoritas researcher tuh pasti akan mencari jalan aman. Mereka akan ngecek yang keras atau yang lain yang datanya sudah banyak gitu kan. Kalau ingin beda dari yang lain ya lanjut aja pakai HER2 gitu, lanjut aja. Nah tapi kan datanya terlalu sedikit. Ya sebenarnya nggak masalah gitu. Dalam arti kita mesti jelaskan keterbatasan itu dalam manuskrip kita kan. Ini kenapa kok datanya cuma sedikit gitu. Dan sebenarnya kan masalahnya kan mesti dicek dulu sih di literatur ya. Tapi kan gapnya justru kemungkinan ada di HER2. Kalau kita ngecek lagi yang ada di crash dan lain-lain, kemungkinan besar orang lain udah melakukannya kan. Saya kira gitu sih kira-kira.
Maaf Prof, tadi saya lupa menspesifikasi tadi yang persen tadi itu frekuensi dari main molecular alteration-nya di lung adenokarsinoma itu apakah mempengaruhi juga kayak sebanyak apa data di database gitu? Apa kayak itu dia cuman mempengaruhi seberapa dia berpengaruh ke kansernya?
Ya itu kan kalau Anda bilang 10% itu hanya pada parameter itu ya berarti berpengaruh hanya pada parameter itu aja Pak. Gitu. Parameter lain ya belum tentu kan. Saya kira begitu. Itu hanya berpengaruh di parameter itu aja, di parameter lain belum tentu.
Oh begitu. Baik Prof. Terima kasih atas jawabannya.
Ya sama-sama.
Oke, terima kasih Saudara Dika. Sepertinya ini banyak antusiasme ya Prof dari audiens kita ya, luar biasa. Dan berikut ada yang raise hand lagi dari Dimas Faisal Darmawan. Silakan pertanyaannya.
Selamat malam, salam kenal Prof. Arli. Perkenalkan sama saya Dimas Faisal. Saya doktoral lagi menjalani studi doktoral di Thailand, di Chulalongkorn. Background saya di fisika medik atau medical physics. Nah, ini sebenarnya menarik Prof karena saya pengen banget bisa background bidang saya ini cukup interdisipliner juga karena bidang saya adalah sekaligus mendelivery radiasi ke cancer menggunakan radiofarmaceutical untuk banyak kasus seperti contohnya prostat cancer menggunakan lutetium, PSMA dan sebagainya. Nah, pertanyaan saya Prof, ada dua. Yang pertama lebih soal drug discovery, pertanyaan kedua soal tumor biomarker discovery. Jadi yang satu lebih ke pencarian obat, simulasi in silico gitu. Nah, pertanyaan pertama ini sih Prof, kira-kira penelitian saya juga berkaitan dengan pharmacokinetic, physiologically based pharmacokinetic yang bisa disimulasikan in silico melalui digital twin. Ada softwarenya gitu, Prof. Nah, perkiraan kira-kira apakah dari sisi bioinformatika seperti prediksi mikroRNA atau transkriptiom, maksud saya yang berkaitan dengan RNA itu bisa diprediksi terus dipasangkan ke dalam obat radiofarmaceutical atau farmaceutical tertentu yang bisa kita simulasikan Pak di dalam farmakokinetik. Apakah ada penelitiannya, researchnya yang beririsan antara farmakokinetik dengan drug discovery tadi yang RNA yang mungkin berkaitan dengan penelitian Bapak. Terus yang kedua adalah pertanyaan mengenai tumor biomarker discovery. Kebetulan juga riset saya juga sebenarnya bersinggungan juga dengan yang namanya radiomix. Jadi adanya kita menemukan tumor expression atau gene expression yang berkaitan dengan abnormality, tapi bisa kita temukan melalui PET CT atau CT scan dan sebagainya menggunakan radiomix ini. Nah, pertanyaan saya, apakah ada penelitian atau mungkin Bapak pernah terlibat dalam penelitian yang mengelaborasikan dataset bioinformatik dengan radiomix ini? Jadi, dua pertanyaan itu aja saja Prof, cukup karena saya juga lagi di tahap eksplorasi untuk proposal penelitian seperti itu. Terima kasih atas bantuannya Prof.
Ya, terima kasih banyak Mas Dimas, ini semoga studinya sukses. Ini pertanyaannya ini menarik ya. Mungkin sebagian nggak bisa saya jawab karena bukan seperti saya gitu, seperti masalah PET scan atau CT scan gitu. Tapi saya coba menjawab dari apa yang saya pahami aja sih, kayak drug discovery. Itu emang apa sih kalau kita bicara sebenarnya bukan drug sih. Yang saya tahu untuk vaksin discovery, untuk RNA itu sudah diaplikasikan ya, untuk delivery-nya tuh menggunakan liposom ya. Untuk kita tahu kan vaksin RNA, vaksin berbasis RNA, mRNA seperti vaksin Pfizer ya, vaksin apalagi Moderna itu ya, Pfizer sama Moderna yang saya tahu dua itu kan. Itu kan mereka pakai messenger RNA dan kita tahu messenger RNA itu kan nggak stabil. Ya. Sama dengan non-coding RNA. RNA kan emang nggak stabil. Nah, dan yang dilakukan pihak Pfizer sama Moderna itu mereka cukup cerdas ya. Saya pernah baca papernya. Mereka kan punya paper paten ya, patennya ya. Jadi mereka melakukan modifikasi kimia ke messenger RNA-nya. Itu untuk meningkatkan stabilitasnya gitu. Terus dienkapsulasi sama liposom gitu. Jadi seperti itu. Itu untuk jadi strateginya. Jadi harus ada. Jadi mereka jadi Pfizer sama Moderna tuh melakukan dua tahap. Pertama dia melakukan modifikasi kimia, tentu aja ada pertimbangannya ya. Saya mesti baca lagi tuh di patent draft mereka tuh di sebelah mana mereka modifikasi dan dan untuk apa gitu ya. Dan kedua mereka pakai liposom, dan itu mungkin strategi seperti dua tahap strategi two step itu yang bisa dimanfaatkan untuk RNA gitu ya, untuk farmakokinetiknya kan. Itu kan untuk mencapai targetnya kan. Kalau vaksin itu kan ya targetnya dia masuk ke sel terus nanti messenger RNA-nya ditranslasikan jadi protein kan. Seperti itu. Nah, kalau untuk tumor biomarker soal PET scan, CT scan ini saya nggak bisa jawab jujur ya Mas. Saya nggak pernah mengerjakan soal CT scan maupun PET scan gitu. Jadi saya nggak tahu itu. Saya kira begitu.
Paham. Terima kasih Prof. Berarti untuk drug discovery lebih ke mungkin gimana strategi buat bisa meningkatkan stabilitas dari mRNA itu sendiri ya, baru bisa dienkapsulasi pakai liposom. Itu dari contoh yang Pfizer dari vaksin COVID kemarin ya Prof.
Betul.
Mungkin itu aja sih Prof dari saya. Mungkin semoga saya bisa dapat pencerahan dari studi literatur yang lain karena semester depan saya harus finalisasi untuk proposalnya dan harus defense.
Mudah-mudahan sukses Mas.
Amin. Terima kasih banyak Prof. Itu saja.
Baik, terima kasih Saudara Dimas Faisal Darmawan. Oke, ini kita selanjutnya ya Prof ya. Ada yang sudah raise hand dari tadi DRTAD siapa ya? Isa. Boleh open mic? Halo. Selamat malam. Kita sudah angkatan dari tadi ya. Oke, kita lanjut aja ke Saudara Stefanus Bernard. Silakan pertanyaannya.
Halo, selamat siang Prof. Lama tak jumpa. Baik. Saya ingin bertanya ya mengenai keadaan di Indonesia saat ini, karena saat ini saya lagi studi di Eropa, kebetulan di Irlandia gitu. Satu hal yang saya kagumi dari Indonesia ya, Indonesia itu memiliki banyak keanekaragaman, di antaranya ada beberapa natural products ya, yang dari Indonesia, yang di Eropa tuh nggak ada gitu. Jadi mereka bikin vaksin sendiri. Di Indonesia tuh kita sebenarnya bisa memanfaatkan potensial resources yang Indonesia miliki kan ya. Pertanyaan saya itu, saya penasaran aja, apakah selama ini kan Prof. Ali melakukan molecular docking dynamic simulation untuk beberapa natural product seperti jahe kalau nggak salah, ginger officinale kan ya. Itu apakah Indonesia sudah memiliki database itu ya, database untuk hasil result molecular docking dynamics untuk natural product gitu. Itu pertanyaan saya pertama. Terus kedua, ini kan kaitannya kembali dengan genom populasi di Indonesia tuh berbeda-beda ya, di setiap populasi, dan sepertinya saat ini sedang dikerjakan yang 1000 Indonesian Human Genome Project, mudah-mudahan itu berhasil ya. Itu saya penasaran aja bagaimana molecular docking ini bisa menjembatani precision medicine gitu ya, dalam artian apa yang Indonesia miliki natural produknya, kemudian dari sisi precision medicine bisa dimanfaatkan, di leverage dengan baik gitu, sama halnya seperti negara-negara maju gitu ya. Baik, mungkin itu aja, terima kasih.
Nah, ini Mas Bernard ini teman saya nih, sebenarnya udah tahu jawabannya, udah tahu dia. Tapi buat yang lain sih ya, buat yang lain oke. Jadi untuk natural products ini database-nya ada atau tidak? Ya, saya kalau untuk database natural products itu udah ada beberapa pihak yang mencoba membuat. Salah satu yang saya tahu dulu UI itu pernah buat UI itu. Kemudian saya pernah pakai database mereka, tapi udah lama saya belum tahu lagi update-nya. Tahu saya punyanya Farmasi UI itu udah sampai versi 2. Tapi selain UI itu setahu saya SGU itu juga buat itu. Dan saya kenal, kalau yang di SGU itu juga saya kenal baik gitu. Yang ya saya kenal baik yang di UI maupun yang di SGU mereka buat. Tapi kalau kita mau bicara database tersentral kayak yang dimiliki Taiwan atau dimiliki China, ya nggak ada. Centralized database seperti yang dimiliki Taiwan. Taiwan itu kan lengkap sekali database-nya kan. Setahu saya mereka punya TCM kan. Dan setahu saya India udah punya itu, mereka database Ayurveda tuh udah punya. Soalnya saya bisa cerita gini karena saya pernah baca paper tentang database Ayurveda mereka punya. India punya, Taiwan punya, China punya ya. Mungkin kalau yang China punya harus bisa bahasa Mandarin, tapi nggak masalah, sekarang udah ada generative AI dan lain-lain. Kita yang problem dari kita tuh dari dulu kan centralized database itu. Jangankan natural products, genom populasi pun juga, setahu saya Kemenkes kan dia ngerjain yang BGSI itu kan, itu. Tapi kan saya belum tahu itu outcome-nya akan seperti apa, akan begini, dan apakah itu datanya akan di posting seperti NCBI kan, bisa diakses dengan publik. Kalau di NCBI itu kan sampai data clinical trials ada tuh lengkap kan, lengkap banget itu. Apakah akan sejauh itu, apa itu hanya internal? Kalau hanya internal kan berarti nggak bisa dimanfaatkan banyak pihak gitu. Itu yang masih belum jelas sampai sekarang. Dan kalau kita bisa bicara jujur sih ya, memang kalau mau dapat data yang terintegrasi, tempatnya bukan di negara kita gitu. Dan itu nggak hanya di bioinformatika, di banyak ilmu, bahkan banyak saya tahu mahasiswa PhD ya yang di ilmu lain, psikologi gitu misalnya. Mereka begitu nyari data di Indonesia kesulitan gitu. Padahal nyari data ke bangsa sendiri kesulitan. Tapi begitu mencari data di Eropa gampang sekali. Karena mereka punya centralized database untuk research itu ada, untuk berbagai bidang itu ada. Di kita yang nggak ada, itu yang menyulit. Memang itu saya tahu yang menyulitkan mahasiswa. Itu yang menyulitkan mahasiswa itu. Yang menyulitkan mahasiswa. Terus mungkin saya coba sedikit. Ini molecular docking bisa jembatani precision medicine. Mungkin molecular docking itu justru paling belakangan itu, Mas. Karena kan precision medicine kita mesti tahu kan, ini mutasinya di gen apa, terus juga gen apakah mutasinya ini non sinonimus atau sinonimus, karena kan dari situ kita bisa prediksi protein modelnya kan, gitu. Baru kita lakukan docking gitu. Kita mesti tahu dulu kan itu mutasinya di mana gitu kan. Kalau yang saya tahu sih obat breast cancer tuh udah ada itu, yang pakai pendekatan seperti ini. Mereka dari precision medicine mereka tahu kan ada mutasi tertentu yang memang hanya orang tertentu memiliki ini, dan begitu ditranslate ke protein ternyata struktur 3 dimensi proteinnya tuh berbeda dengan yang tidak termutasi, dan itu mereka docking gitu. Tapi itu ya mesti ada database-nya dulu kan. Kayak lagi mesti ada database-nya dulu, itu yang kelihatannya masih perlu diperjuangkan, saya kira gitu. Terima kasih.
Oke. Bagaimana Saudara Stefanus? Apakah sudah
Ya,
menjawab?
baik, terima kasih Prof. Arli. Ini hanya catch up aja, karena kan saya studi di sini udah beda ya bidangnya ya. Saya replikasi DNA gitu. Kalau di Pak Prof. Arli kan ingin catch up aja, keep update aja. Oh, ternyata situasinya seperti itu. Berarti butuh ada kolaborasi ya dengan banyak stakeholder ya, supaya database sentral itu kalau bisa terwujud di Indonesia seperti itu. Baik, mungkin itu aja. Sukses terus Prof. Arli. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.
Oke, sama. Baik,
Tapi
Prof,
saya tambahin, ya. Oke. Gak apa-apa, terus.
Oke, ini masih ada tambahan waktu ya, jadi kita akan baca pertanyaan dari room chat, ya Prof ya.
Ya, silakan.
Oke, ini ada dari Saudara Hendrik Lim. Hi Prof. Arli, thanks for your interesting presentation. I have the following question. Is there any DNA-based drug available in the market? And what are the challenges in developing this kind of drug compared to RNA-based drug? Thanks for your answer in advance.
Okay, interesting questions. Actually, if you ask me, is there any DNA-based drug available in the market? I'm not sure, because I haven't read any papers about that. What I read so far is about RNA. So I'm sorry I cannot answer you about this question. But this is actually a interesting alternative, because you see that DNA is much more stable than RNA. So I believe that if you want to validate your model in the lab, you will have a much better possibility of success compared with the RNA one. Yeah. But unfortunately, I haven't read so much about DNA. But I can assure you, because it will be less challenging than developing RNA-based drugs, because the DNA structure is limited. As far as I know, you only have 3 or 4 types of DNA structure. One of them is Z, and others it's unlike RNAs, when you can have millions of possibilities. So I think if you do 3-dimensional modelings and eventually you apply that in the lab, you will have a better possibility of success. So I think that's what I can say.
Oke, thank you Prof. Dan satu lagi ya Prof ya, pertanyaan dari room chat. Ini dari DRTAD Isara. Assalamualaikum Prof, I have 2 questions for you. Yang pertama mengenai given the heterogeneity of breast cancer and the diverse mutation across different subtypes, how do you approach designing sirnas that are effective across multiple cancer types? Dan yang kedua mengenai how do you see the intersection of CRISPR, Cas9, gene editing, and sirna technologies in treating disease like cancer and viral infections? Are there any current initiative exploring their combination? Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. or Mrs. Isara. So for the first question is, yes. So I mean, if you want to design a universal silencing RNA, so there is one step that you have to do. But you have to do a multiple sequence alignment for across multiple variants of HER2, for instance, for HER2 genes. So basically, what we did with our research is definitely is not really that representative, because our samples are not that much, because they're just focusing on introducing the how to do prediction of RNA modeling. So because we don't have that, using that much of samples. So if you want to have a more representative sampling, so basically you have to download a database of various HER2 genes, and we haven't checked it again. But for instance, but this is different with the one that we did with SARS-CoV-2, right? We actually, the samples are quite representative. We downloaded several SARS-CoV-2 variants in Asia, and so we have the conserved region of by using this multiple sequence alignment. So that's basically what you have to do. I mean, in terms of designing the silencing RNA, you need to have a lot of samples, and then you do multiple sequence alignment with those genes, and then you have the conserved region. Yeah. Basically, that's the thing that you can do. And the second question is, how do you see the intersection of CRISPR-Cas gene editing and silencing RNA technologies? The intersections between two of them. Actually, I don't know, but actually we do have research in CRISPR-Cas gene. We develop CRISPR-Cas design for Plasmodium. You can check. We have a papers already published in a journal about CRISPR-Cas diagnostic in Plasmodium. Yeah. But we did not combine it with silencing RNA because we never thought about that before. It's basically we just use we design a primer for conventional PCR, and also we design a primer LAMP primer, and then we design the guide RNA for the CRISPR-Cas gene editing. So that's all. We did not use silencing RNA for our the diagnostic pipeline. So I mean, if you ask me about is there any initiative about that, so I don't know. I cannot answer that. So I have to check it out. Okay, thank you.
Oke, thank you Profesor Arli. Dan tak terasa teman-teman, ini sudah 30 menit ya kita Q&A sesi. Dan sebelum kami tutup, Prof, kami akan memberikan kesempatan kepada narasumber kita untuk menyampaikan closing statement webinar pada malam hari ini. Kepada Profesor Arli kami persilahkan.
Alright, so I'm going to use English, yeah. So I'm so sorry I cannot I cannot answer all of your questions. So I mean, if you still have questions, you can drop me an email. But my closing statement is this: designing silencing RNA is basically an alternative way to deal with infectious disease, and also with cancer and tumors, right? But what I want to convey here, in order to materialize, to apply your design in lab, it's not really as easy and as straightforward when you do that with proteins. Okay, the RNA assays is still much more difficult to apply in the lab compared with the proteins, and we have that experience as well. As I have told you earlier, we actually have designed natural products leads for COVID-19, and we already apply the leads to in animal testing. We did in vivo testing, and we are still using the conventional paradigm of proteomics. We're using protein docking and things like that, but we did not do that with silencing RNA, because it's going to be time consuming. We need a lot of money, and the success rate is not really that high. So what I can say is, although this is a new paradigm, it's not really that new. I mean, John Matix published his paper in 20 years or so. It's already an old concept, but maybe it's not new, but it's just maybe you just heard that now. No, it's not a new concept. What I can say is, don't teach the conventional central dogma concept yet. We still need that, because the thing is to design vaccines and vaccine and drugs. I mean, you can see in the COVID-19 pandemics, the conventional paradigm of central dogma still works to deal with the pandemics. So, and it's the most straightforward and the cheapest way to deal with that. So I mean, it's all in most instances, the transcriptomic approach, especially for therapeutic design, is still in experimental stage in most cases, but for diagnostic it's already applied, and for diagnostic it's no problem. For diagnostic it's all good. I think that's all from me. So I hope all the best for all of you. I hope you all will be successful in your research, whether you are graduate students, whether you're bachelor student, whether you are postdocs, or even if you are a professor. And I hope all the best for you. You become a successful person and to be a extraordinary person as well. Thank you very much.
Oke, thank you very much Profesor Ali atas closing statement-nya yang luar biasa ya, semangatnya untuk kepada kita semua teman-teman. Baik, saat ini kita masuk ke sesi terakhir, yaitu sesi dokumentasi. Untuk teman-teman silakan bisa aktifkan kameranya masing-masing ya, dan siapkan senyum terbaik kalian malam hari ini. Oke, for all the participants, please turn on your camera for photo group. Kami tunggu 1 menit ya. Luar biasa ya Prof, malam hari ini audiensnya sangat semangat sekali ya, pertanyaannya banyak. Karena materi dari Prof Ali yang sangat luar biasa malam hari ini. Oke, untuk operator ready ya. Oke, saya hitung. 1, 2, 3. Oke, lagi persiapkan senyum kalian. 1, 2, 3. Oke, the last. 1, 2, 3. Oke, baik. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. Tak terasa kita sudah berada di penghujung acara, yang mana rangkaian acara webinar pada malam hari ini berjalan dengan lancar. Kami ucapkan sekali lagi terima kasih sebesar-besarnya kepada narasumber yang hebat malam hari ini, Profesor Dr. Renat Arli Aditya Parikesit SSI MSI, yang telah membagikan ilmunya yang luar biasa, dan semoga bisa memberikan dampak yang positif bagi kita semua. Terima kasih sekali, Prof. Dan untuk para peserta sekalian yang telah menyimak webinar dari awal hingga akhir, saya ucapkan terima kasih. And we would like to thank for all the international participants who attend webinar tonight. Saya selaku moderator, mohon maaf jika banyak kekurangan pada malam hari ini. Sampai jumpa pada sesi webinar selanjutnya. Selamat malam. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Sampai jumpa lagi.
Terima kasih
banyak. Sama sampai jumpa lagi.
Terima kasih.
Saya izin permisi.
Oke, silakan.